Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Rachel Jones Ross joining us today. It's freezing outside. It's been freezing outside for the last however many days here in New York and seemingly everywhere I travel. So Rachel is going to be talking winter essentials, gear, stories, everything you need to know about taking pictures in very frigid conditions. So Sony Alpha Collective member Rachel Jones Ross, welcome back. It's good to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. And you guys seem to like my stories, so I'll just keep telling them as long as you'll keep listening.
Of course, we love having you on. And you know what? You get to go out and take the pictures in the conditions that all of us love. We love to look at the pictures. But as we were talking about in the green room, I wear fingerless gloves. I'm looking at, we got a quick preview of some of the gear that you wear out there. And I'm like, nah, that's not me. I'll stick with my pajamas, my t-shirts, and some New York City heating going on over here. I got it right next to me pumping. So I'm going to turn the heat up. I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to get them in. I want to send a huge thank you to not only all of our viewers tuning in, but also Sony for sponsoring today's event. Rachel will be taking your questions throughout, so don't wait until the end. If you have a question, throw it into the chat or the Q&A if you're joining us here on Zoom. But Rachel, I'll kick it over to you.
All right. Thank you again so much for having me. I do love being here and being able to share my stories with you. So I thought I would just start by giving a little overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Winter is a season of change. It is both challenging and beautiful. It's my favorite time of the year to photograph anything. And it just, I don't know, the winter has my heart. It's, I guess I'll start by talking about how winter started this year. So winter came in with just this amazing blast of cold and snow. It's been snowmageddon for pretty much the entire month of December. And temperatures were getting pretty cold for being out there shooting. Forecasts were, kind of minus 32 degrees Celsius. And I've been out shooting in as cold the temperatures as minus 38. On that note, I have a little story for you. This actually happened last winter, and it's really, really embarrassing, but I think it's a good way to talk about some of the things that can happen during winter and set the stage for what I'm going to share with you today. So last year I had a couple of clients, and they were local ladies to my home here in the Canadian Rockies. They're from Calgary, Terry and Diane. Shout out to Terry and Diane if you see this. And so the day we were going to go out and shoot, they wanted to shoot the stars, and so we set off in the morning. We were in two different vehicles, and as we were driving, I was watching the temperature gauge in my vehicle just like go down, 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 and the forecast that morning was minus 33 Celsius. And these ladies, they live here. They know what the cold is like, and they knew what to expect. And we talked about it, and minus 33 is very unpleasant, but it's manageable if you have the right gear. So as we're driving, I'm watching the temperature fall. It's like minus 33, minus 35, minus 36, minus 38, and then it hit minus 40. And so we get out to the location, and I talked to these ladies, and they were still game. And I said, okay, I'll go out and I'll set up the shot, and I'll just, try and figure it out. And then you guys come out and just give me 10 minutes. And then that kind of reduces their exposure time in the cold. So we got out, and it was such a challenge. Like, I felt like I would just take the battery out of my pocket to put it in my camera, and it would be dead before it got into the camera. I would get, just a few shots. And, but we managed the shoot. It was successful. And when we were driving home, the heater stopped working in my car. So it would blow this like really tepid air at me. And it wasn't blowing anything warm, but luckily I was all bundled up in all my winter gear, and I was fine. So a couple of days later, I'm out, and I'm by myself this time. And again, the forecast is like minus 33 Celsius. And again, I get out to the location, and it's minus 40. But this time, my batteries seem to last longer. I shot on a single battery for from over an hour, maybe even closer to 2 hours. And I was thinking, wow, this minus 40 is really like a lot warmer than minus 40 the other day. And I was talking to my sister later that day, and I told her the story. And she said, Rachel, you do realize that -40 is the lowest temperature that your vehicle will record, or that most vehicles will show, right? So chances are that first day out with Terry and Diane, we were in temperatures much closer to -50 Celsius. And that morning when I was shooting on my own, it was probably even colder than -40. But it can be done. And I learned a lot of things from that. One of the things is, not to trust the thermometer in my vehicle to tell me what the temperature is. And the forecast can be very wrong. But when you're prepared for winter, it makes everything so much fun. The video on the left here is trying to get through the snow. This is called post-holing. If you've ever been in this situation, the snow on the top can get a little bit crusty and thick, and then your weight, you just go through the snow, and it can make travel really hard. But if you're prepared and you got a pair of snowshoes, then life is pretty easy breezy if you're warm enough. So for me, being winter ready means that I always want to have an emergency roadside kit. I have a little battery pack so that I can boost my own vehicle if necessary. I carry an avalanche shovel. Not that I'm probably going to dig myself out, but at least if I get stuck, I have that in the car. An emergency blanket, and for photography, I carry micro spikes and or crampons with me. Always have water and snacks in the car, and lots of warm layers. So this video on the right is just, I had a couple out shooting with me, and it was so cold in the morning that the doors froze shut on the car. Yes, I do drive a Mini Cooper. It's a 4-door Mini Cooper, but with studded winter tires, it handles the snow really, really well. Drives like a little champ. So the number one thing that I have in my bag all the time, and I can't believe I ever lived without, it's called a Garmin InReach. And this allows me to basically be in touch with home or with family or with emergency services from anywhere in the world at any time. It connects via satellite, and it's subscription based. So a basic plan with 20 texts is like $20 a month. And the plan that I have is unlimited because I use it a lot. So for $80 a month, I can get weather, and this is Canadian dollars. I can get weather, and I can message home. I can keep track of my location. When I send somebody a message, it has a pin for my location, so somebody can see where I am at all times. It's really, really it's just a life-saving tool. I actually have had to use it for emergency evacuations twice last year. And I just would have been so sunk without it. So I can't recommend this enough. It is available through B&H. And when you sign up for it, if you do get the plans, you can have a plan for only a month. You don't have to have it on for the whole year. I use it all year round just because I'm always outdoors. But if you did, say, 2 or 3 big photography trips a year, or you had, once a month you went out camping, you can turn it on for just the time that you're away, or the month that you're away. It's a 1 month based. Yeah, and being out in the winter, I get conditions like this. This is a hike up to one of my favorite places in Kananaskis. And the snow up here was so deep, I was able to get in on snowshoes. And if I took the snowshoes off, I fell in snow that was up to my chest. Like, it was chest high, and I had to take my backpack off and dig myself a little runway and then roll out of the snow to get out of the snow. It was so deep. And then the cold temperatures, also you get like frost flowers and other really interesting things to photograph. So I will share with you what I use to keep myself warm, and then we'll talk about camera gear a little bit. So I'm chronically cold. I'm always cold. I think I don't produce my own body heat. I've determined that I might be cold-blooded, and that when I get cold, I have to go and submerge myself in a bathtub or sit on a heater or something like that to get warm. And a couple of years ago, I was in Calgary, just walking down the street, and Fjällräven had this sign that said, "Never be cold again." And they were advertising their iconic 1974 expedition jacket. And I bought it. It was the most money I've ever paid for a jacket in my life, but I have literally never been cold since. I mean, the top part of me has never been cold since. I'm still working on, trying to find good bottom layers, but this one is, I think they say it was 2 jackets that were sewn together. It's got a ton of down in it, and it's a really, really great puffy layer. I feel like I'm wearing 2 sofas, like that maybe I have one strap to the front and one strap to the back, and it's very puffy, and I can't wear it in the car because it's too big, but it's really, really, really warm. And my other favorite thing for keeping warm is these gloves by the Heat Company. They also sell chemical warmers. The gloves are very cool because they have an outer lining that helps you to stay or helps to keep the wind off of your fingers, and then an inner liner glove that have touchscreen fingers. So if you're out there operating your camera, you can just unzip the mitten part and fold it back. It's got a little magnet, a little stick, and then so that you can reveal your fingers. So you don't have to wear fingerless gloves. Fingerless gloves would be really, really bad at -32 or even -20. You can get frostbite if you're out there long enough. And so with the touchscreen gloves, I'm able to operate my touchscreen, and I'm able to find the buttons on the camera, anything that sticks out, so I can change my settings without taking the gloves off. They also have these little wrist straps, which make me feel like a toddler, but in the wind, if you take your gloves off for any crazy reason, then you're not going to lose them in the wind because they're attached to you. And then they also have these little zipper pockets, and you can put in chemical warmers. I use chemical warmers when it hits -25 to -30. It just gets too cold for somebody who's cold-blooded like me to actually stay warm. And then they also have these ones that you can put in the bottom of your boot. And if you get the insole style instead of just the toe warmers, it covers the whole bottom of your foot, and it keeps the whole foot warm. And on really cold days, I'll use the toe warmers, which are just the tiny little ones that go on over your toes. And I'll put those on top of my sock. And then I'll have the insole warmers on the bottom, and it makes like a little heat sandwich for your toes. It's pretty awesome. So it can be hard to keep your camera running in the cold. So you can imagine from the story I told you at the beginning, if my car doesn't want to produce heat at -45 or -50 as I'm driving, the same thing is going to happen to your camera or happen to your batteries. So there's a few things we can do. First of all, if you keep your batteries in your pocket, that keeps the battery warm until you need it. So on really cold days, anything below -25 or -30, I actually start the shoot with all the batteries in my pocket next to my body, where they're going to be warmest. If they're in your bag and your bag is freezing, and you have your bag in the snow, then the batteries are still going to discharge. They're not going to keep a charge that whole time. So keeping them next to you, keeping them warm, makes them really happy. I was in the Yukon earlier this year in August, and it wasn't winter time, but it was still cold. So my first night camping, it was -7 Celsius, and that was August 18th. And I don't know what happened. Maybe I left a camera on or something, but I had 7 batteries with me, and they needed to last 7 days. And I time lapse, and I do night shooting and all this stuff. And I had 2 cameras with me. And when I arrived, I think I had left both cameras turned on in my bag somehow, because the first 2 batteries were pretty much dead. So I was down to 5. And then after my first shoot, I had gone through 1 battery. So I'm down 3 batteries on my very, very first day. And so I was messaging my son from the InReach. He's slightly brilliant, and he's in electrical engineering school. So I messaged him and I said, so if I have a battery that has, I had these battery packs, and I think it was 20,800 milliamp hours or something like that. So I was like, So if I have a battery pack that's 20,000 milliamp hours and my camera battery is 2,000 milliamp hours, does that mean that I get, 10 charges out of this or what? And he was like, well, that depends, like if the batteries are cold and they're not going to want to connect with each other, they're not going to talk to each other, it's not going to be very good. But if you can keep them a little bit warmer, it'll be, roughly that minus, some technical, weird electrical things that he explained to me and I no longer remember. But anyway, so I tried charging the battery in the cold and I didn't even get a full charge. And I had gone through half of my power bank with my 20,000 milliamp hours. So after that, I just started putting everything in my sleeping bag with me and I would charge it basically next to my skin so that everything stayed warm. And I did manage to get through the next 7 days, although I had a little help. I had Anthony from Ontario, was a Sony shooter, and we met out in the middle of nowhere, and he let me borrow a couple of batteries for the rest of my trip. So I ended up being okay, and I learned that even when you're charging the batteries, that they need to be kept warm, and that was at -7, -5 Celsius. Nothing this cold. So the other thing about cameras in the cold is you really want to avoid any abrupt temperature changes. This is a photo I've had for a few years. I was out time lapsing and I had left the camera run for about 6 hours. And I think it was only about -18, but just the time that it was out there, and the camera was set up beside some open water. And so it got all this frost flowers had formed around it. So if you ever do experience anything like this, you want to use a blower, like a little air blower, to remove the frost off of the lens or off the camera body. If you're using a cloth, like a lens cloth, you'll probably just melt that layer of ice into your lens and cause smearing. So if you can, try to remove it with a blower first. And you want to when I said avoid abrupt temperature changes, just leave your camera in your bag. If it gets this cold, you can just leave it in the bag and let it come to room temperature over time. If you take it from a cold environment like this, and then you put it in your car, or, you take it into the house and have it connected to the computer or something, it's going to form a lot of condensation on the inside, and you don't want that. So just leave it in your bag. You can actually avoid getting frost forming on the outside of the camera by just using any simple camera cover. I use the disposable plastic bags just because they're super lightweight and they don't take up any space in my bag, and they do the trick. So, just the little rain sleeves is all that you need, so it doesn't form ice.
Rachel, we did have a question come in from Colin joining us here on Zoom. He's asking if you've used heat packs on your camera next to the battery compartment.
So I haven't done that. I think it's a good idea. You can try. There's also, you can get little like camera jackets. And if you were to have the little camera jacket that's got the down lining in it, and then you put the chemical warmers beside the heat packs, that would probably work even better, just because you have some insulation to trap that heat in. And when the camera is operating, it produces a little bit of heat from the battery and from the operation. So if you can trap that heat in, that would be good as well.
Do you have any?
I'm surprised how long the camera will operate in really cold conditions.
Do you have any issues with condensation in your viewfinder? Is that ever a thing with the moisture getting in there and constantly breathing warm air into your camera?
Yeah. I mean, that's a little bit of a process. So whenever I'm trying to focus at night, especially, I have to use the viewfinder just for my eyes. That helps me to make sure I have focus. But I have to hold my breath, because if I breathe into the viewfinder, especially on a Sony, then the Sony thinks that you're actually looking through the lens, just because there's frost there or condensation or whatever is built up on the little screen inside. And so then it won't show you your LCD. So I hold my breath a lot when I'm focusing or trying to get my eyes in there. It's like a little
whatever works, right?
Trying not to fall through the ice the whole time. And if that does happen to you, There is a spot in the menu system where you can select, instead of having either auto, viewfinder, or monitor, you can select one or the other. So if you do breathe on the inside of your viewfinder and the camera thinks that your eye is there constantly, you can go into the menu system and find that and just turn it to LCD, and that'll help you.
Cool.
I've had to do it. I don't remember where it is off the top of my head in the menu, but.
Perfect. All right. That's all we have for now is the questions.
Okay, cool. So a friend of mine, Dan, sent me this, and I have had a chance to use it. It does actually work pretty cool. You plug this thing into a little power bank, and it's a cuff that goes around the lens, and it can help to prevent frost from forming on your lens while you're out there for longer periods of time. So I know there's lots of different, it's just a lens heater. There's lots of different brands out there. They're relatively inexpensive. So if you are going to be shooting in a cold environment, this could help you out. So earlier this year, I had gone on a little adventure. I had one other person with me, sorry, two other people with me. We had decided to venture up to Moraine Lake after the roads were closed. So Moraine Lake is a very iconic spot in the Canadian Rockies. Typically you can drive there, but around Canadian Thanksgiving, they close the road when it starts to snow because it's just a high risk for avalanche in that area. And the roads get really slippery and it's just a really steep road, very, very narrow. And so not very safe for driving, but you are able to hike in or bike in or do anything that doesn't have a motor on it. So it's very good for, skiing or hiking or fat tire bikes can get up there in the snow. So we had a big aurora forecast, and I had been visiting family up in Fort St. John the day before, which is about a 10 or 12-hour drive from Lake Louise. So with this aurora forecast on the horizon, I drove overnight to try to make it to Lake Louise so that I could hike the 12 kilometers in. It's like 25 kilometers round trip. We'll call it 12 in. And met up with my friends at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hiked in here and set up for the night to shoot aurora. It's a really rare event to get aurora over this lake for this particular view here in the Rockies because of the latitude. So typically at this latitude, we need to be in a location looking towards the north to be able to see aurora. But when the storms get really strong, we're able to see them towards the south. And this one is facing southeast. So this was a really like a bucket list shot for me. And when we arrived that night, the water was actually moving. It was lapping up on the shore against the shore. So there was like lots of little waves and stuff from this lake. So to give you an idea of how cold it is, before I left in the morning, this ice had formed, and there was all these little shapes that you see in the front here are methane bubbles that had started to freeze in the ice, and the whole lake froze solid overnight. And so did my toes. My toes got really, really cold, and I didn't realize how cold they had gotten. I had chemical warmers in my boots, but they only last for like 6 to 8 hours, I would say. And we started our hike at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we shot all through the night. By 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, I was getting pretty tired, and I just sat down on a rock and I bent over my own knees and I tried to have a nap. And when I got up, because I hadn't been moving, my toes got really, really cold. So we started to hike out that morning, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you get really cold, when you start to get circulation again, it feels like it's burning, and it can be really, really painful. And so we were trying to hike out, and my toes were absolutely on fire. Like they hurt so very, very, very bad. And so we make it back down, no damage done. I didn't get any frostbite or anything. They had just gotten really, really cold. But I finally found, after that experience, I went looking for a pair of boots, and I finally found a pair. I don't know if you guys can see me, but these are the boots. They're from Canada Goose, and they were the biggest, most ridiculous boots I've ever bought in my life. I thought that I bought them in white because I really wanted to look like, you know, one of the spies on the movies when they are all dressed in white and they're all camouflaged into their winter environments. But I got them and I look a lot more like a stormtrooper in them. But they are very, very, very warm. I didn't even need chemical warmers in them, just because they have such thick soles on the bottom, and that keeps, you know, some space between your foot and the ice. And yeah, they were just crazy good. So if you're looking for a ridiculously warm pair of boots, I need to go to the gym to wear these because they're really heavy as well. But these are the most excessive boots I've ever bought. And I bought them because of that trip. But I'm still pretty happy that I went up there that night, even though I nearly lost my toes. This is a little time lapse from the morning that I was driving down to hike Lake Louise. I had to pull over and have a nap. So I pulled over in Jasper at this place is called Pyramid Island. And I set up a camera for the last 2 hours of the morning. And I went and had a 2-hour-long nap. And that's what I captured while I was napping. It's not always cold in the wintertime. Actually, we have, in the last week, we just had a Chinook. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard about Chinooks and what those are, but it's a very warm, dry, gusty wind, and it tends to blow down the eastern slopes of the mountains and the western prairies. And it brings, not only can it get super warm, so we can go from minus 32 to, it was plus 10 on average here, I would say, for the last week, all over the mountains. But it also brings like really amazing cloud formations. So we get this thing called a Chinook arch. And the picture in the right, you can see a little bit of a Chinook arch, but these Chinook arches are these long stretches of lenticular looking clouds, and they can be miles and miles long. They can stretch for an entire mountain, like, you know, across entire mountains. And the other really cool thing that happens with a Chinook is that the snow actually sublimates. So sublimation is a transition of a substance directly from a solid to a gas. And it doesn't pass through a liquid state. So it doesn't even really like melt. The snow just disappears. It sublimates into the air. And when it does that, then it can reveal all kinds of cool things on the ice. So this is a lake. This particular lake is called Abraham Lake, and it's pretty famous because it's so windy there. The winds there last night were 70 kilometers an hour. It's so windy there that it keeps the ice fairly clear of snow anyway. But then when you add a Chinook and you get this sublimation, the whole lake, which is 30 kilometers long, can be just a sheet of glass with no snow or anything like that on it. So I was out there with a group. We actually just got back a few days ago, and I'm going to play this for you. So we were just horsing around on the ice, but we had been out there the day before. And I have to preface this by saying the ice here is 3 feet thick. But the day before, with all the Chinook temperatures, there was actually a little bit of melting that was going on in some places, and then it would refreeze. And so we'd get this like little thin layer of ice on top of the 3 feet of ice. And so that's what happened in this particular thing. I'm just going to play these videos. So Vanessa and I were just playing, but at the end, I pushed her right into this little thin patch of ice. And she didn't know where she was. So I was pushing her, and then all of a sudden she just heard the ice breaking, and she's like, "Rachel, breaking, it's breaking." And I'm laughing because I know that I'm on 3 feet of ice and it's just the top, but she's all fanned out like a little baby deer who's just gone down on the ice. And she's trying to keep her weight spread out because she thinks she's going to go through. And I'm laughing so hard, I can't even catch my breath. And I can see the water like kind of rising up around her. And I'm like, "Vanessa, you're sitting in the water, you gotta get up." And so I'm like trying to hoist her up behind her arms and like pulling her up out of the water and the ice. And it was it was just one of the most comical things I've ever experienced out there. But that's what happens when you get a little Chinook action. So she's sitting in the water. From the video, it looks like I abandoned her, but I really didn't abandon her. I actually stayed and helped her up. And then I just could not stop laughing. It was really, really quite warm that day. You can't tell because of how many layers I'm wearing, but. So if you're out there on the ice, you need about 4 inches to support a 200-pound, a person up to 200 pounds. And 5 inches of ice, you can support the weight of a snowmobile or an ATV. So I carry a little ice screw around with me, just so that I can, so I can test the thickness of the ice. Out there at Abraham Lake, you really don't need, one of these, because you can see down through the ice and you can see the levels of bubbles. You can usually tell that you have, 3 feet of ice underneath of you. But if you can't see through the ice, then a little ice screw will help you. I know that if I can get my ice screw in all the way and I don't reach water, then for sure I'm going to have enough weight to support myself out there on the ice. And again, this is super lightweight and pretty much everything I need just to make sure I'm safe. So no Vanessas were harmed in the making of those videos. We were just having lots of laughs. This is a video from the Natural Bridge. This is just a couple of days ago as well. But ice is kind of tricky the way it forms, especially when you have moving water. So there's a waterfall that's frozen, and the way the water comes down and it creates a current, then it falls down and then it comes up. And where it comes up, that's always the last place to freeze out at this particular location. And so it actually has an open hole of water. And there's other parts of the river that are completely open where you can see through it. So this is one of those places where you really want to bring an ice screw with you and know how much ice that you're trying to stand on, because you definitely need more than 4 inches. But the way that the ice forms, it's really hard to tell sometimes if maybe the current underneath has created a thin spot of the ice. So yeah, always play safe. Make sure you know how thick the ice is. So this is back to Abraham Lake. And as I mentioned, it's very famous for the wind. So if you just even let your tripod go, the wind will carry it clear across the ice because it just gets so smooth and glossy. But it's really cool for photography because, you get these amazing, beautiful reflections, and you can see, all this depth in the ice with the bubbles and stuff like that. So to manage the slippery ice, personally, I wear ice spikes on my feet. So those are little micro spikes in the left-hand video there. And on the right-hand side, those are spikes for the tripod. So they'll help you to just stay put a little bit more. Although I have to say the spikes on the tripod, because there's not a lot of weight on the tripod, sometimes they don't help that much. So having weight or having that spike from your tripod kind of wedged into an ice crack, that'll help to keep it in place really well. But it's not all bad. It can be really, really beautiful. Those Chinooks and other types of winter weather. This is actually just from this past week as well. We went out to this particular spot. I took a workshop group out there, and they shot stars for the early part of the morning. And then we went to the car to get warmed up, and as we were warming up, the clouds started to roll in, and they got an amazing, just beautiful pink sunrise, all moody pinks and purples. And then when the color disappeared, this sort of fog rolled in, and when the sun got high enough, it lit up the fog, and so they just got amazing, amazing shots. My favorite thing to photograph in the winter, though, is the winter nights. I'm definitely a night shooter, and I think most people When most people think about winter, they think about constellations like Orion, because we don't really see, for most of the winter, we don't see the Milky Way, but Orion can be really cool to shoot. And at the end of the presentation, I'll show you what I've been doing more recently with Orion using an Astro tracker and an Astro modified camera. But this is just with my regular camera, and these are not track shots. But having the winter constellation of Orion can really make a night composition very interesting. And the Milky Way actually it is visible during the winter. It starts here actually in just a few days. The first 2 minutes of being able to see the Milky Way above the horizon will be February 3rd. And then by the end of that new moon cycle around February 11th, I think it's visible for about 15 minutes. It's visible even longer than that. So it'll be visible from 5:48 p.m. until 6:09 a.m. And then by the end of the month, it'll be visible for basically an hour. So February of last year is when I took that shot on the right. That's from Bow Lake. That's the Milky Way rising above the mountains there. And the shot on the left, I think, was February or March. That's out near Jasper National Park. And you can just see the core of the Milky Way creeping up above the mountain. And of course, the other favorite thing for most people to shoot in the winter months is the aurora, and we've been getting amazing aurora activity lately. We've actually just had a period of aurora activity the last few days. I haven't been able to get out and shoot though, because it's been snowmageddon here. But we have been in a period of solar minimum, which means that there's not a lot of solar activity from the sun to produce auroras, but we came out of that solar cycle and we're moving into a solar maximum. And that means that until 2025, I believe, we're going to be getting increasing levels of storms and auroras. So if you're into shooting auroras, the next couple of years are going to be really amazing, because we're entering into that period of activity on the sun where we're going to get more and more solar activity, which translates to more and more aurora activity. When I'm out shooting and looking for compositions in the dark, I love on my Sony cameras, I can use bright monitoring to find my compositions. So at the start of this little video, you could see the screen was just black. And then when I turn on bright monitoring, I'm actually able to see where the stars are aligned. There's just a few stars in this one because this is October in Alaska. Actually, I think you can see is that the Big Dipper right there, or parts of the Big Dipper? So you can imagine then that if you did have Milky Way, you can actually see how the Milky Way lines up. And in this case, there was a little bit of aurora off on the right-hand side here. So I was able to see that in my composition. So when I'm out there night shooting, especially when it's cold and I want to limit my exposure to the cold, bright monitoring is one of my very favorite things about a Sony camera that will help me to nail my composition pretty quickly. This one has to be set up in your custom keys. So it's not something that's readily available. You have to go into your custom key functions and then assign bright monitoring to one of the custom keys. And I like to use my C2 for that because it's right on the top of the camera and it's a pronounced button, and so I can find it with gloves on. One of my other favorite tools is the Sony Commander remote. This little remote is super handy, especially for night shooting, because you can focus stack with it, and you don't have to be able to see what you're doing to be able to do that. So you just find an initial focus point, which is what I'm doing here. You can see that my aperture is at f2.8, so I'm kind of simulating a night shoot, but doing it in the daylight so you can see. And then once I find that initial focus point, I turn the camera into manual focus. And then all I have to do is press the plus button there, and then the shutter button, and it'll make small steps from from my near focus to infinity until I'm focused all the way through. And so it makes focus stacking a breeze, especially if you can't see, at night where you're focusing. You can find that initial focus point and then just use the step function to find infinity. And once you reach there, your stars should be pretty sharp. You always have to double check that playback though, and make sure that you've reached the right level of sharpness for stars. But I was out shooting the other day and it was very, very cold and windy, and I had my gloves on, but I was able to just keep the remote in my pocket and use the step through function and focus stack my shots for a shot of the stars over the bubbles at Abraham Lake. So if you don't have one of these and you're a Sony shooter, I highly recommend. Other camera systems like Nikon and Canon, some of the cameras have focus stacking built in so that you can do that. It's just a built-in function that you just program it to take a certain number of shots at a certain aperture. So as promised, my current directions are to, I'm doing a lot more tracking and stacking, and I'm doing that with my Slick ECH 630 Astro Tracker. It's just a tiny little unit. It's not any real bigger than a lens. So you can see compared to my camera, it's like half the size of my camera. I don't know what it weighs off the top of my head, but I'd say about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds. And I just set that up on a ball head. And then the second little item that you see there, that little unit is it's a micro adjustment tool so that I can line up my tracker with Polaris, and then I can make little micro adjustments with the micro adjuster. And then for my own ease of use, I have another ball head set up on top of the tracker that I mount the camera on. And that's the start of this shoot here. This is actually my son. We were in Hawaii and I had him sitting out on these rocks in the middle of the water. And then before the stars came out, I actually just pulled the tracker back a few feet so my camera didn't get wet. And then I blended those two shots together. So this camera is my Sony A7 III, and I had it modified by Spencer's Camera for astro shooting. And that just means that the camera is going to allow more of the red wavelengths of light. So you can pick up all these like little details here in the Orion Nebula, like all these little nebulas and gases. It picks up color really, really well in the stars. And yeah, and I think that they also make adjustments to the focus for night shooting as well. But it's really cool. I've had a lot of fun playing with it, and just gives a whole other perspective of what you're looking at in the night sky. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. Do you have any questions?
Of course, we got some questions. We're going to start it with Stephen. Stephen is out there on Zoom. Stephen, if you had any specific questions on photopills, Stephen was asking about some of your thoughts on photopills. But Stephen, if there's any particular questions you have on photopills, we'd love to ask those to Rachel. So we'll move on while we wait for Stephen to come back on that. Oh, he says no overall. So Rachel, thoughts overall photopills?
Okay, I actually do have tons of thoughts on photopills. If you're into any kind of night shooting at all, photopills is absolutely amazing. It's just such an amazing planning tool. I often get asked that question, if you could only have one accessory in your bag when you go out there to shoot, so, aside from your camera lens and tripod, what would that accessory be? And hands down, I would rather have photopills on my phone in my pocket than to have a headlamp or, have pretty much any other accessory. I just think it's so useful. You can use it to figure out what your shutter time needs to be for obtaining really, really sharp stars, given your particular lens and the aperture that you're shooting at. So your aperture, your focal length, and your particular sensor on your camera, and it'll do a calculation to help you obtain really, really sharp stars. It's good for planning the times of day that you're going to go shoot. So, if you're into blue hour blending, what time do you need to be out there for getting your blue hour? And then what time is night going to be to help you find alignment with the Milky Way? Like there's so much that it does. You could literally do a full day long course and still be just kind of scratching the surface of photopills.
Wonderful. Thanks for that information, Rachel. Now, Cindy, who's joining us on Zoom, is asking about your process for moving equipment from inside to outdoors, vice versa.
Right.
And then kind of a add-on question to that. If any of the camera's electronics are sensitive to very low temperatures, so what's your process like for shifting gear, changing lenses, all of that?
Yeah. So if it's really cold outside, I try not to change lenses. I just think that's a pretty bad recipe. But if desperate, I have done it, and I can do it. I would try to only use gear that's at the same temperature. So, I wouldn't leave something in the car. I wouldn't leave my lenses in the car, take my camera out, and then go back and put a warm lens on a cold body. So I'd make sure that everything was at the same temperature. But I really do try not to change lenses when I'm out in the cold. Moving from indoors to outdoors is not so bad. It's moving from outdoors in the cold to an indoor environment that is the biggest shock, because it just happens so fast that the camera is going from, really extreme cold, say -20 to +20, and it causes a lot of condensation, and that condensation can form inside of the camera and the inside of the lens. So I always try to just leave my equipment in my camera bag and let it come to room temperature over time. And if you've had your camera bag outside and it's -30 and you leave it, in your living room or whatever for 3 hours, you'd be surprised at how cold it still is, especially if you undo the zipper. So just let it come to temperature slowly over time. And that's a lot easier on your gear. It's a lot less shocking. I haven't had any electronic issues in the cold. My only electronic issues I've ever had have been when something gets wet. And so if you're thinking about, frost forming on the lens or anything like that, that's just frozen wet. It's just frozen water. So you want to be really careful about how you remove that so that you're not creating like little pools of water anywhere that are going to get inside any of the buttons or sensors.
And this Nikki is asking if you have any suggestions on how to keep tripods from freezing, such as the knobs freezing on you, ball heads, the like.
Yeah, I have not discovered anything for tripods freezing, except for try not to get them wet. If you're going to be out there shooting, I mean, I'm often sitting, over a little stream or a little open bit of water, and then it freezes. And, it's just like anything else. When I told you the story about my heater in my car not working, it's the same thing with everything. Like stuff just stops working at a certain point because it gets so cold. And if you have frost forming on the legs of the tripods and then you go to extend it or collapse it at all, then all that frost is going inside in between all the little joints. So I don't really have any suggestions for keeping that from freezing. But if it does freeze, like if you do get frost and stuff on the tripod, again, try and dry it out when you're in the car. I will always stick mine, crank my heater vents and stick the tripod right under a vent while I'm driving and try to dry it out before I get to the next spot. Keeping everything dry, keeping that moisture out of there, that's going to help the most.
Okay. And Mark is asking about memory cards and batteries. Do you remove those before coming indoors?
Yeah, you're way better off you can open the camera bag for a minute and take that stuff out. And as long as you don't leave your camera out and exposed. I often do it in the car if I think I need the images right away, because the car is sort of, that transition place between the warmth of your house and the outdoors. So if I knew I needed it, I would take those things out in the car, put them in my pocket, and then just leave my bag closed while I go inside.
Wonderful. Now, Cindy has a question. Cindy is in Connecticut. So she's got a lot of farms, oceans, et cetera, out there, wide range of scenery. Cindy's asking, she says, beautiful landscape photos for people who obviously not everybody lives on a frozen lake with a beautiful, vast mountain range like that, easily accessible. Do you have any tips, Rachel, for people getting interesting photos and just beautiful scenery like you get who don't live near these vast landscapes?
Yeah, I guess then you have to find the beauty in the area that you are. I think that when we learn about the area and we learn something, the storytelling becomes really important. Then, you know, I am lucky that I live in an area where things are just, they basically, it's just like angels singing all the time. But I think that storytelling in your images becomes really important if you don't have that sort of natural majesty to work with. So an example I will give is I started listening to a series of books, or a bunch of books on the same topic, but it's how trees communicate. And I was really fascinated by how trees communicate. I learned that they share resources, and they do so even between species. And they have, like, I don't know if you've ever listened to or read, because it's on audiobook, The Hidden Life of Trees is where I started. And then I read another book called The Mother Tree. And I just learned so much about how trees communicate, how they send out warning signals to other trees that there's a giraffe eating their leaves, or caterpillars. I just think it's so fascinating. And so I started looking at what makes this particular type of tree interesting. The ancient bristlecone pine forest, I started photographing the trees there. They're some of the oldest trees in the world. They're dated to over 4,000 years old. And then I went to the giant redwoods, and those ones can be over 400 feet tall. And they start looking at the story behind it and how to photograph that story in a meaningful way. I'm still working on it, but I've been working on trying to tell the story about how trees are connected. And hopefully one day I'll have something worthy of sharing, but, you know, trying to find that story, trying to find that interesting thing about the landscape that you're in. What is the history there? What story can you tell in that photograph that gives it some meaning and purpose?
What is your mindset like, and how do you guys pack when you're going into a situation like this, where some of these locations that you're going to, it's not uncommon to have blizzard warnings, blizzards, avalanche, stuff like that, that are really serious weather concerns. And you have to balance safety with the gear that you have to carry to get the images you want.
Yeah, 100%. So I am a big fan of education. I think that that's really important. I take courses whenever I can on everything from avalanche safety training to glacier traverse and crevasse rescue. I'm not a climber. I don't ice climb, but I still take the courses because I think that often I find myself in situations where, you know, I wouldn't have anticipated something like that. And I live in an area that has all of these dangers. We've had really, basically just, we had snowmageddon all through December, and then we had a Chinook, and that creates really serious threats for avalanche, just because those big heavy packs of snow, those slabs can start to move and create avalanches. The Highway 93 Icefields Parkway between Lake Louise and Jasper was closed all week last week because of avalanche. They were actually doing controlled avalanches there to clear the snow and make sure that it was safe for people. And so anytime that I'm going out, these are all things that you really do have to know before you go out. And I check avalanche websites. I check so that I can see what the current conditions are. I'm very big on making sure that you have the right safety gear to go with. I've talked about the Garmin InReach and, you know, having a nice screw, because I was focused a lot on being out on the lakes during this talk. But like I mentioned, I just briefly mentioned that I had 2 pretty serious evacuations last year, and they happened to be just me out with friends. And one was a pretty serious laceration to her head. She lacerated her head from basically the back of her skull to just above her eyebrow, and needed to be evacuated, but it took an hour and a half for rescue to get there. And I was holding her wound together the whole time. That was in a really benign environment where you just don't expect things are going to go wrong. You know, we were actually in Alabama Hills at Mobius Arch, super famous spot. There's some rocks there, but she had been sitting at her camera for a period of time, and she stood up. She was a little bit older. And when she stood up, she just sort of got low blood pressure, and she kind of got dizzy and fell forward and fell headfirst into those rocks. And so, you know, I'm a, what do they call it? An advanced wilderness medic. I've taken the wilderness first responder training a couple of times. I actually renewed mine early this year after the 2 evacuations I had. The other one was for heart trouble. And yeah, so education, like you can't put enough value on that. When I first got into photography, I would just go out and do anything. And I had this attitude like, oh, well, other people do it, so it must be safe. That's totally not true. It's 100% not true. The day that I filmed that little video inside of the natural bridge where that opening is, and then what you can see the water coming underneath, I know how that place forms the ice. And you can see foot tracks in there. And a lot of people assume that because other people have walked in there, then it's safe to do so. But the ice, it forms differently depending on whether there's current underneath of it. And so you'll get spots that are thicker and spots that are thinner, and it can be really dangerous. And you really just have to know, you have to be educated on when you go in there, what are the dangers, what to expect, how to be safe. Do you need to have a rope and rope in to test the ice? And these are all things that I think about. When it comes to managing the actual camera gear, I really try to just bring what I need with me. Sometimes I do long hikes, and it's more important for me to have my warm clothes with me and water and, you know, the necessities of life than it is the camera gear. So if it's a long hike and it's winter, I often bring just one lens, one body, and one tripod, and try to, you know, keep that part of it minimized so that I can maximize the stuff that I need to take care of myself.
Wow, that was perfectly put together. You sound so prepared. You almost made me sound confident about going out there into any of these conditions. But you said it perfectly. It really, you can't understate the importance of knowing everything that you need to know. You don't want to get into a situation where you're like, ooh, I didn't prepare for this. So wonderful. Yeah. Well, Rachel, tons of information as always, tons of beautiful images as always. Like I said, we'll have to bring you back and do a what's in the bag, because I know a lot of people will be interested to see exactly how you set your pack up. But thank you once again for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us. Huge thank you again to Sony for sponsoring today's event, and of course, all of our wonderful viewers out there. Thank you guys for tuning in and getting your questions in. But that's all we got for you for now. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space is in the books. We'll catch y'all next time.